Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to a special ROKER Report podcast as we begin the countdown to our third appearance at Wembley in as many seasons, this time in the form of the EFL Trophy Final, where we are due to face promotion-chasing Tranmere Rovers from League 2. So today we are delighted to be joined by the Vice Chairman of Tranmere Rovers, which is, of course, Nicola Palios. Welcome, Nicola.
Good morning.
You must be ridiculously busy in the build-up to Wembley, which we'll obviously get into, but how are you keeping at the moment?
Yeah, it's very strange times for football, but as a club, we're keeping well. You know, we're flying at the moment in the league. We've done well in the cups this year. And there's a sense of positivity, which is nice because I think particularly with this third lockdown, you know, people's heads were really starting to go down a bit. I think it's got to people a lot more than the first and even the second lockdown. So it's nice to be able to bring a bit of good news and a bit of happiness to the Wirral Peninsula.
Definitely. Well, we'll get on to the build-up in Wembley and how it's kind of impacting the Tranmere fans, especially at the minute, as you mentioned. But I want to kind of give Sunderland fans just a kind of, you know, where you've come from to get back to here. It's an amazing story when I started digging into it. It's been kind of 7 years since you and your husband, Mark, took control over the club at Tranmere. And like I said, to say it's been a rollercoaster would be a bit of an understatement. But to start off with, I mean, does the fact that you've taken this on as kind of a husband and wife mean that you can kind of help each other, you know, when the lows come, as well as kind of enjoying the highs, because you both live in it, which is pretty rare?
It does. I think when we first got involved in the club, we had a conversation and it was basically along the lines of we either do it together or we don't do it, because I think we knew even then it would become so sort of all-consuming that if one of us was off doing that and the other one was sort of, you know, sitting at home twiddling their thumbs or doing other things, would be like ships that passed in the night. So it was always the intention that it would be the two of us together that would do it. That having been said, it does mean you never get away from it because we think about it, we talk about it constantly, you know, at home as well as during what would be a normal working day, to the extent that any football club has a normal working day.
I was thinking about it because obviously it must take some kind of focus for one of you to be the one to try and pick the other one up when you're both kind of in it so much and so deep.
Yeah, I think we've sort of taken turns at that sometimes. I think Mark, particularly if we just lost a game, like any fan, for the next 12 hours, you're not going to get anything other than, you know, a really unhappy, grumpy Mark. And hopefully that I can help put a bit of perspective on that. But equally, he's been an enormous help to me. Sometimes, you know, when things aren't going as you want and you're sort of worrying about things, then, it's just great to be able to have somebody to talk to who understands the issues and the pressures that football clubs bring.
Like I said, on the flip side, I imagine you've had some pretty spectacular celebrations as well. But I mean, you took over in 2014, and at the time, the club were on the verge of relegation from League One after actually 13 years at that level.
Well, they had just been relegated from League One when we took them. Yeah, right.
Was that in the August when you actually took control? Was it?
Yeah, we took over basically on the first match of the season. But yeah, they had been relegated at the end of the previous season.
Was it in the pipeline as the club were fighting that relegation, or did that come in the summer?
Well, it's quite a story actually, because until the sort of May of that year, Mark and I had never contemplated getting involved in Tranmere. But Mark, because he had played at the club for so long and he still had friends who were working there, from time to time when we were up in the area visiting family, we would pop into the club and say hello to people. And we went into the club in the April, I think it was, of 2014. And it was just in a really sorry state. A number of staff had been made redundant. The fabric of the stadium was really deteriorating. The paint was falling off the outside. The seats were rusting. The club, some of the players had been involved in or were being investigated. They were actually subsequently exonerated in a spot fixing issue. And obviously off the pitch, they were struggling and threatened with relegation. And as we drove away, Mark said, "It's really sad to see my old club like that. It seems to be in a bit of a death spiral." But we thought nothing more of it. And then we went off we have a house in France. The last day of the season, we were driving back from the house in France, listening to the radio, and it came over the radio that Tranmere had been relegated, because it was one of those weird situations where lots of things had to happen on the last match. I think, 10 minutes out they were safe, and 10 minutes later they were down, and it came over the radio, the club was relegated. And Mark said, I think that might be the end of Tranmere, because Peter Johnson had given it some great years and had been supporting it for years and years and years, but bluntly was, I think, fed up of just writing out big checks at the end of each season, and had been openly trying to sell the club for a long time. And I think Mark's view was that, as I said, it was in a bit of a death spiral, and with the relegation to League Two, they could easily go straight through into the National League, and Peter might not be prepared to continue supporting the club on that basis. And I said quite flippantly, well, why don't we go and do something about it then? And by the end of the trip back, the drive back home, we'd convinced ourselves to at least pick up the phone to Peter Johnson and have a conversation and see how he felt about it. So it was literally the middle of May was the first time we had ever contemplated it. And by the beginning of August, or the 9th of August, I think it was, we'd done the deal and were the new owners of the club.
That's quite amazing, really, because, like you said, Mark had turned around and said, well, because of this relegation, they're likely to go down again, likely to go in administration, and you still did it, because you knew those dark days were going to come, really, by the sounds of it, but you still jumped in.
But the backstory to that is Mark had a very unusual career, because although he was a professional footballer for many years, he played over 400 games in the league. He became a chartered accountant alongside it. And after his playing career was over, he became the head of business turnaround for PricewaterhouseCoopers. So his speciality was going into troubled businesses and trying to turn them around and save them in a very hands-on way. And so the thought process that we went through was, he knows the area, he loves the area, it's his club, he's played for them for years, he understands football, he understands business turnaround. So in some ways, he had the ideal CV, and I also come from a business background. I had recently sold my business interests. So it was a bit of, well, if we can't do it, then the football model is really, irretrievably broken in this country. So let's see if we can do it and get it back to a position where it can be financially self-sustainable. Because whilst Mark and I are wealthy by many standards, by the standards of wealthy people, and certainly by the standards of football owners, we certainly aren't. And we simply weren't in a position to be able to bankroll the club indefinitely. So it was very much a remit to come in and to sort the club out so that it could be financially self-sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, inevitably, maybe from what you said, but actually it was quite close. But that second successive relegation did come. And it was kind of obviously sad on any occasion, relegation, but it was actually Tranmere losing their status of being a football league club, which they'd had for 94 years, which, is huge for the club. But I read, it was interesting, after going down the last day of the season, 3-2 defeat at Plymouth, you actually approached the fans afterwards, which, on such an occasion, just sounds like such an odd thing.
Because so many of our fans, I think there were about 750 odd, had gone down to Plymouth in the almost certain knowledge that was going to be the day that we were relegated out of the Football League, as you say, for the first time in our history. And we just felt that, we've got to acknowledge the fact that the fans know how difficult a time we're facing, and they've stuck with us. And the support we got from them was absolutely amazing, and it's it really galvanized us and kept us going through what were some pretty torrid times.
I noticed that season your top scorer was a certain Max Power, with 7 goals during that season, and he left at the end of that season to join Wigan Athletic. But obviously, I mean, those sort of things are always a blow. He's a local lad who came through the ranks. But I mean, in terms of the big picture, you were kind of touching on it there. I mean, obviously, inevitable kind of redundancies, followed at the club, obviously dropping into the non-league. But I mean, how bad, kind of in financial terms, did things get after dropping out of the AFL? Were you expecting it? Was it on the levels that you were expecting, or did it actually hit the club harder than you thought?
It's pretty brutal. I mean, obviously you lose the EFL funding. When we went down, we were the last club to go down under the old regime, which meant you got half of your normal funding for a year and then nothing. They've doubled the amounts you get now to cushion the blow a bit. But we just missed that. And it also meant that in your third season, you lost all the academy funding and the registration rights to the players. And that was a real blow because, Tranmere had been a club that had, a history of developing players. Max Power is a good example of that. Aaron Cresswell. And we were really sort of aggrieved by this because we just felt it was wrong in principle because the first team hadn't done well, despite the fact that our academy was consistently getting excellent ratings and was, under 16 champions and was flying. We lost the registration rights to our players. And I have to say, it kind of divided the good guys from the bad guys in our minds in terms of the way that some of the clubs in the EFL and the Premier League dealt with us after that, because there were some who actually, if they wanted to take our players, said, look, we know you're not technically due compensation anymore, but we are going to treat you as if you are because we think it's the right thing to do. There are others who I will spare their blushes by not mentioning them on here, but who did the exact opposite and, like vultures swooped and took off the players that some of whom had been with us for many, many years and took them for nothing. And that hurt. So, I mean, the revenues that the club lost during the 3 seasons that we spent in the non-league was about £3.5 million deficit through that period, which was a significant amount of money to us.
Yeah, I was going to say that at that level, £3.5 million is a huge sum.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, obviously, the plan to come back and drag the club back from that low, I mean, how do you plan to restructure from kind of 2 successive relegations with the aim to come back? Where did you start?
So the main thing was to start trying to build parts of the business where the success wasn't dependent on what we were doing on the pitch. And that was because we wanted to have reliable income streams which would finance a top third budget for us in whatever league we were playing in, year out. So it was interesting in the first year because one of the first things that we did after having been relegated into the National League was do a big revamp of the stadium. We revamped all the hospitality suites and did a major piece of work. We replaced 6,000 seats in the stands. We repainted it all. And it was an important... It was important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it enabled us to start building those hospitality revenues and other income streams that would hopefully provide us with a sustainable income. But also it was a very visible sign to the fans that we're not letting this club go and we're planning for the future. And we know we're at a low point, but we are building back and we're going to build back stronger and better than the club ever was before. So oddly, the first thing that we did was spend money but then you had to, because the problem was that the club for years had been cutting costs and cutting playing budgets and cutting staff bills, etc., so that the cheque that Peter Johnson had to write at the end of the year was as small as possible. But it doesn't work ultimately because everything had become so tired, the function rooms and that had become so tired that nobody wanted to have their parties or weddings or anything like that in there anymore. So we had to reverse that. And we also started building other businesses and doing things like looking at some of the community stuff separately as well, in a way that it actually generates revenue for the club. So we had, like most football clubs do, our charitable foundation, which does brilliant work in the community and actually, a lot of really wide work well beyond football. But we also felt that there was a lot of stuff being contracted out by the local health authorities and the local council to third parties around fitness, around mental health, around employability, that we as as a football club were probably better positioned to be able to engage with the people that they were trying to get to than some of the sort of corporate providers or council bodies that were doing it. And so we started building with them a model for using the club as a delivery tool for important programs. So a good example is the mental health agenda. Obviously, at the moment, there is an issue with suicides and depression, and young men are at particularly high risk. Now, if you try and tell a 21-year-old bloke who's suffering depression to go to a sort of counselling session or to go along to a clinic somewhere, he's not going to go.
Yeah.
If you tell them to come down to the football club and have a game of indoor five-a-side football with, another dozen blokes who are all in the same camp, and then, you sit and have a talk and a discussion with them afterwards, it's something that they actually enjoy, and it brings so many extra benefits. I mean, the fact that they're doing something physically produces the serotonin in the brain, which of itself helps make you feel better, but it means they're out and they're socializing and they're talking to people who will empathize with them and not stigmatize them. And so it works really well, and they come back again and again. And we get paid for that, because as much as the NHS or the council or whoever it is commissioning would pay their own staff to deliver it or pay a third party, they've actually found that using us as that delivery vehicle gives them better results. So that for us was a real win-win, because it really makes us an important part of the fabric of our local community, and it's also benefiting the club at the same time. So that was another big plank that we started building then, and I think we've really seen that come into its own during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Just the small things that you can do just to not just to make people feel better about the football club at times like that, but just to help the community just by those small things. And like you said, a football club can be central to those things in a community at times. But I mean, back on the pitch, I mean, you get the ball rolling. You finish sixth in that first season in the National League, and then Mickey Mellon comes in, and the following season you lose out at Wembley in the playoff final, Forest Green, which must have been a huge blow, which I'll not dwell on. You did finish runners up, but the next season you won the final after finishing runners up again, and a pretty epic final at Wembley against Boreham Wood in 2018, where, I mean, it's fair to say you did it the hard way, down to 10 men after 46 seconds. Then you were forced into making all three substitutions before half time.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously,
one of our players got hit by a bottle from the crowd and had to go off. So, as you say, all our subs before half time. I think I'm right in saying that we didn't have a single one of our first team defenders on the pitch by half time, and it was like, oh my god, and then, so despite all the odds, we'd gone 1-0 up, and then the referee played the most astonishing amount of injury time at the end of the first half, and I think I think they equalised in the 9th minute of extra time in the first half, and so went back in at half time, and it was like, this is just could not go worse. We cannot be in a position where for the second year in a row we're going to get to the playoff final and lose out. But we were down to 10 men, we had no subs left, we were a patched up defence, and then North pops up with a winner, and the rest is history.
Fantastic. But I mean, was it also a huge, I mean, obviously celebrations, fantastic day, but was it also a relief to get back in the Football League as well?
It was a massive relief, absolutely huge relief. I mean, the financial burden at that point was really heavy. As I said, Mark and I aren't mega millionaires who could carry on funding it. And there were times when we were really, losing sleep at night about, can we get the wages paid this month? And I'm proud to say we always did pay everybody on time. We never missed a payment, but blimey, it was hard work, and it was an enormous stress on us. So the relief of growing up was absolutely huge, and it just sparked the most enormous party. And one of the lovely things about being a lower league club, and at Sunderland, you were obviously in the Premier League not so long ago, so I don't know how it is now for you. But one of the things that I really loved, and our fans really loved, is that the players, the managers, the owners, we were all celebrating together. Everybody was drinking together, partying together. There were some epic videos and photos of what just turned into a week-long, absolutely mind-blowing celebration. It was great. And I thought, for all the playing in the lower reaches of the Football League lacks the glamour of the Premiership, and Liverpool fans, when they did their amazing things last year, got to see their heroes from on a bus or on a balcony, whereas ours, there's that real sense of connection there, which I think is almost impossible to replicate if you're up in the higher reaches of professional football.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I reminded something. I had a bit of a smile on my face when I was reading last night when I think there was a story I read where you had the trophy in a plastic bag or something in a restaurant, and someone wanted
a Chinese restaurant,
and someone wanted a selfie when you were walking down the street with it and things like that. I mean, kind of the next season as well, you're at Wembley again. Second home, which is probably the narrative for this talk, but as we build up to it. But next season, League Two playoff final against Newport County, and getting a little bit of revenge on Forest Green in the semi-final must have been nice on the way as well. Got your own back there, but keeping up the tradition of drama. The playoff final itself, it's drifting into a penalty shootout. Up pops Connor Jennings last minute of extra time to take you into League One. Obviously amazing to look back on where you'd come from, but was this the point where you thought, right, you've returned Tranmere back to where this should be in terms of the stature of the club?
I think there was an element of that. I think because, you can argue about where Tranmere's natural place in the league is. And for many, many years, it was in the Championship. And, in fact, was in the playoffs for what's now the Premiership 3 years in a row. But one of the things that to me is a bit depressing, but that happened during that first sort of 5 years of our ownership was really the enormous chasm that opened up between the finances in the Championship and the finances in League One. Because I think when we first came, you could see how just organically, from growing the business slowly and steadily and sustainably, you could get back into the Championship and you could sustain yourselves in the Championship, which I think was probably where we felt would be the perfect outcome for Tranmere. In that intervening period, the gap in wages between League One and the Championship has just become an absolute chasm. And it's difficult to see how, absent somebody coming in and putting a significant new investment in, that you can sustain that. You get the odd outliers. You look at Accrington, for example, for the early part of this season, and they were up there and challenging, although like most of the smaller clubs, they tend to fall away at the end. Wickham made it up there this year. They're obviously going to come straight back down by the looks of it. I'm not convinced they would have got up if we'd played out the season. I think they were lucky because, as I say, you tend to find the clubs that haven't got the big budgets are the ones who fall away in the last third of the season, but they can't afford to compete with the Championship wages. They're so distorted by the parachute payments from the Premier League in particular, and so that makes it a bit more difficult. So yes, getting back into League One and staying in League One, I think is, I don't want to say not difficult, but you can see a clear path of how you do that. Even getting promoted to the Championship, I think, is doable. Sustaining yourself in the Championship, being able to have a second season there, I think needs something more. And what Mark and I have said on that is that would either need external investment or us to move stadium, interestingly, which is always a controversial one with football fans, but it is one of the ways that we could potentially fundamentally change our off-pitch revenue streams, because it's not as if we need a new stadium for fan number purposes. We have a stadium that holds over 15,000 at the moment, but it's around having something that is much better able to do in the model of MK Dons, all of the hotels and the music venues, and make it a real destination 365 days a year around it. So that would obviously be a huge project if it came off. But I think it takes something like that now to be able to sustain yourselves in the Championship.
It was interesting from my point of view, because actually there's conversations where even the gaps kind of got that big. There's conversations with Sunderland fans saying, even if we made that step up with the squad we've got now and the wages that we've had to have in League One, it's a big step for even for us to make into the Championship and how we can rebuild the squad. So, I mean, and especially you making that kind of journey so quickly back up from the National League, it's probably, you're taking an even bigger step. So it's amazing now that the leaps that you could take. Once upon a time, people could, I remember Swansea and a few other clubs, Wimbledon, obviously back in the day, jumping through the leagues as if it was, no problem and easy to do. But
and it was much more possible then. But the impact of what goes on in the Premier League just has ripple effects all the way down the pyramid. And for my mind, the parachute payments is one of the massive distorters, because there is so much money in the Premier League now. And the parachute payments are so huge. Well, I mean, it's maybe hard having this conversation with a Sunderland supporter, because it obviously didn't work with Sunderland. But, 9 times out of 10, it means you just get yo-yo clubs and they go back down, they come straight back up because they've got, budgets that are 10 times the size of the people they're playing against. And to me, it kind of a bit destroys the competitiveness. It's a bit like, having a Formula One race and somebody's in a Ford Escort, who's going to win before it starts. So salary caps, I think if they did bring those in at some point in the Championship in some form or another, that might help. But at the moment, I have to say the Championship is a complete basket case in terms of finances.
It is. But I mean, you mentioned, talking about kind of sport and merit and integrity and all that. So can't really not mention the outcome of last season. And I've obviously read and heard Mark's description on a podcast and in writing, where he basically felt like the club, rather than being relegated on sport and merit, were kind of voted out of League One. Obviously, he had that feeling that the sport integrity was taken out of the proceedings. But did the club feel like there was a pathway to getting that last season finished?
Yes, we did. We felt there were other things that could be done, but actually our main proposal wasn't around finishing the season as it happened, because I think we accepted that some clubs were going to struggle enormously financially for that. So as much as we were prepared to finance doing that, we didn't want to force other clubs into a position where they were likely to go bust. So basically, we had put forward a proposal, which is basically, look, use PPG, but where it gives you incredibly tight results, then you don't penalise people as a consequence of them, because it's just not fair, particularly when you are carrying on playing when it suits you, like in playoffs, for examples. You're essentially taking a financial decision to stop this early. And so just in those areas where history, where probability shows you that, these people would not have gone down, then they should be given the benefit of the doubt. And we didn't think it was that radical a proposal. But sadly, I think you saw for a lot of clubs, it brought out the worst in them, in that I can't tell you the number of people who said, oh, but that means there'll be, one extra club relegated next season, which makes our chances of going down statistically slightly higher, so we won't vote for it. And it was hard to take. It was really hard to take, and we refused to say we were relegated. We say we were demoted.
I certainly don't blame you on that front. But we'll not dwell on that for too long. But actually, I mean, another blow really, because we mentioned Mickey Mellon, the job that he did, and following that unfortunate, I'll call it demotion as well as I go through, the season was abandoned. But he left for Dundee United in July 2020. Obviously, kind of a big blow, but I mean, is that part and parcel of having a manager who's successful for a few years at that level and someone's just going to come in at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I would rather be in a position where other clubs are trying to pinch our manager and our players than not, because at least that means you're doing something right and you've had success. And I think the view we take, certainly with players, and it's no different with managers, is if you can do a great job for us, and then move on to better things, then we won't stand in your way of doing that. And Mickey had got us back up to League One, for which we will always be grateful. The way it ended was disappointing, obviously, with the demotion, but I don't think we can lay that entirely at his door, but it was due to the way that the vote panned out. So yeah, he went off to Dundee, but it was I think it was an unsettling time for the supporters. But funnily enough, I think that sort of burning sense of injustice over the way that the season had ended sort of kept people together in a way that otherwise might have been difficult to sustain if we'd just been relegated in the normal course of events.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you went with Mike Jackson at the time, who was Mickey Mallon's assistant, but he lasted till Halloween when you were 18th after 10 games. And then you appointed Keith Hill in November. And since then, you've won 14 and lost 4 out of the last 21 league games. You've lost only twice. Oh, sorry, we've lost only once so far in 2021. Impressive turnaround. And I was going to say that obviously it's never going to be a pleasant thing when you have to sack a manager and make a change. But I mean, does it make it much easier on that decision when you have this turnaround in terms of form and league position as well?
It does with hindsight. I mean, obviously the difficult bit is it's always a gamble when you appoint a manager to some extent, because you can't know for certain how it will pan out. We felt with Mike that he'd been with the club a long time and he was a very highly respected coach and he'd been a big part of the promotion stories. So we felt we owed it to him to give him a chance at it. Bringing Keith in was, a different kettle of fish. He's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of his level of experience as a manager, and we felt we needed that because we knew we had good players. We knew we had really good players, but something just wasn't clicking in terms of getting them together and playing well together. And we wanted and we needed somebody who was very experienced in order to do that. And Mark spent, I think, about 40 hours interviewing candidates. Because he interviewed on the shortlist, he interviews them for a long time. The interviews go on for 3 or 4 hours, and he does that quite deliberately because his view is somebody can lie to you for 45 minutes or they can keep up a good front. When you've spoken to them for 3 or 4 hours, you get to see the real the real person behind the rehearsed answers and this is what they want to hear reply. So he'd put a massive amount of effort into that, and Keith was a manager who had phenomenal success in League Two, which was really important. In every single season that he's had a full season in League Two, he's either got promoted or been in the playoffs. And where we were at that point in time, that seemed to us to be a stretching but brilliant target to have. So yeah, we appointed him, and it seems to have certainly paid off.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, huge turnaround. Like I said, you were kind of 18th, and I mean, right now you're sitting 4th in the league. At the time we're recording this, really tight at the top, and it was 4 points separating the top 5 up there in League Two. I mean, considering the kind of position you find yourself now, is it now from this stage, a couple of months left, or whatever, getting to the business end of the season? Is it the expectation now that you're in the mix for, the top 6, if not the kind of automatic places towards the end of the season?
Absolutely, the automatic places are the target. As much as I love going to Wembley, for my blood pressure and my sanity's sake, it would be nice to go up as champions for once and not have to go through the roller coaster. So absolutely, automatic promotion is the aim. There is a sense in the squad of... There's a really good spirit in the squad at the moment, which is nice to see. It has shades of the spirit that we saw for that team that got us out of the National League. It's quite a Scouse thing. Mark always tells me that Merseyside dressing rooms have a certain different characteristic to them. We've got some strong characters in there. We've got some great experience. We've got some really experienced players like Jay Spearing, James Vaughan, Peter Clark, but they're all strong characters in the dressing room, and it means there's a great spirit. That hopefully, it's that sort of never say die attitude, and hopefully that will get us back to League One.
Yeah, well, you're certainly preaching to the converted with Sunderland fans in terms of the playoffs. That's for sure, because we're sick of the sight of them as well. But you mentioned one of the main reasons for the good form there, which is someone who's familiar to Sunderland fans, and it's James Vaughan. 19 goals so far this season. I'm sure somewhere
Well,
in the back.
in the league. He's got more if you count the cups.
Yeah, absolutely. In this run, he's been fantastic. But he's flying after signing from Bradford in the summer. He's been fantastic.
Yeah, he is. It's been great to see. He's been the lift that we've needed. He's certainly made a big difference to us. I mean, it's a funny thing with strikers, how they can work in some places and not in others. I mean, ironically, the leading scorer in our league at the moment is Paul Mullen, who was with us, and we let him move to Cambridge because he hadn't worked out with us. And I think sometimes it's just to do with the way that the team is being set up around particular individuals. They may work somewhere better than others. Yeah. Sometimes I think players just have a purple patch. I mean, we were so lucky that we had James Norwood for that amazing year when he scored, I think, 32 goals. James Vaughan seems to be coming into his own and scoring goals for fun at the moment. And we've got another one, Kane Woolery, who's started popping them in for fun as well. His tally isn't as high because he's, has only been regularly playing quite recently, but he's scoring for fun at the moment as well, which is good to see.
Yeah. Sunderland have got a long tradition of ex-players coming back to haunt us, so...
I think we've all got that. But Tranmere fans have still got an enormous soft spot for Max. I think Max was Tranmere for many years, came through the academy. He's, as I said, because we are a sort of lower league club, he's probably personally known to so many of the fans in a way that may not be the same with you. I don't know. There is a genuine infection there. In fact, Mark and I were laughing about who's his dad going to be rooting for, because his dad's an absolute dyed-in-the-wool Tranmere supporter. So we decided he's going to have to hope that Tranmere win, but Max is a standout player for Sunderland in a hard-fought game.
Okay, well, I'll see what the odds are on a Max Power hat-trick and 4-3 to Tranmere or something like that. Well, I mean, my kind of experience with Tranmere, I'm going back kind of, the Tranmere sides were around 20 years ago. You reached the League Cup final, FA Cup, 3 FA Cup quarterfinals in the space of 4 years under John Aldridge. And I was actually at Prenton Park in 2000 when Tranmere beat us in the FA Cup. And John Aldridge cheekily brought on a sub for Clint Hill when he was sent off. I'm sure Keith Hill won't have anything like that up his sleeve. But I mean, since those days, obviously, I've always had this image of Tranmere as a tough place to go to, especially kind of a cup team, because I was brought up on Tranmere being that kind of cup team. You've clearly taken the Papa John's Trophy or the EFL Trophy seriously this season. You've had Manchester City under-21s, Leicester under-21s, Peterborough, Oxford in the semi-finals. But I mean, what's your view of, because there's quite a lot of criticism that's thrown at this competition at times, but kind of what's your view on this competition and the criticism it gets at times?
Well, it's an interesting one because I think there's a band, Half Man, Half Biscuit, who wrote a song called Swerving the Checker Trade, and they're massive Tranmere fans.
I've been sharing that all over the place recently.
Yeah, so obviously there was this sort of, slight antipathy towards the competition from our fans because of the youth element. I think because they felt it was one of the trophies that, the club had a real history in, and it was one of the chances for the lower league clubs to get to Wembley and, win a big trophy, etc. And they felt that the gloss had been lost a little bit. I think I see it from both ways. First of all, I don't see it as the thin end of the wedge for B teams, to be honest. I think there's so much resistance to B teams that it wouldn't happen. And the harsh reality is that in the guise that it was, the trophy was struggling to be financially viable. They couldn't find a sponsor for it at that point. And I think they manage it quite carefully. I don't think the EFL wants one of the youth teams to win this trophy. And for them, it's about getting some proper competition for the young players.
There was an uncomfortable game we had in the group stage where we beat Aston Villa under 21s kind of 7-0, and it was a bit kind of men against boys, and it was a little bit uncomfortable, but I mean that semi-final night, winning 2-0 at Oxford, huge night. And I think a lot of clubs have had these sort of nights during the pandemic where, you know, although everyone misses the fans every week, every game you want the fans. I mean, a night like that, it would have added so much if you were able to share that win at Oxford with some fans who made the trip. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I don't want to moan about what it's like being at the games, because I'm painfully conscious that I've been lucky enough to be able to go to all of our home games when our supporters haven't. But it's dismal sitting there in an empty stadium with, no response from any crowd to anything that's going on. It's really just takes a massive part of the game away. And I think you're seeing some really strange results in every division. And part of it is because of that, I think. It does change the dynamics of a game of football.
Well, it's your fourth trip to Wembley in almost 7 years, as we've been going through. You must be getting used to these trips to the capital. Must be almost getting boring going to.
No, it's the fourth trip. It's the fourth trip in just under 4 years, actually.
Well, 4 years. I was going the total, but yeah, obviously with the first couple of years, I was kind of discounting that that first bit. But yeah, I mean, like I said, you must be getting used to it though. But again, I mean, we mentioned the semi-final. It's going to be very different without the fans. A big occasion's all about kind of a full Wembley Stadium and the fans. But I did notice that you officially requested to delay the final, but then it was declined by the EFL. Was there ever a point where that looked a possibility, or did you kind of get the impression that it might be a non-starter?
No, to be fair, the EFL did try very hard to look at alternatives. It was complicated. It was complicated this year because of the Euros and contractual commitments that Wembley already had, as well as other things that were baked into the calendar. So the only date that would have been available was sort of right in the middle of the playoffs. And I think it was always going to be difficult because, there's a chance that we may be in the playoffs. I hope we don't need them. And likewise for Sunderland. So, yeah, they did try hard to find an alternative, to be fair to them, but it just wasn't to be.
It's good to know, actually, because on the face of it, when you see all you see in the press, as far as people like myself are concerned, you see that you put the request in and you just see the EFL knocking it back. You're not quite sure how much the effort they actually go into looking at it, but it's good to know that it was actually kind of considered and thought about. But yeah, I mean, obviously we talked about the atmosphere at these cup finals, obviously huge, like kind of nervous energy. I mean, do you think it's going to impact the players playing in an empty Wembley, kind of without the fans there? Because in cup finals, players they feed off this nervous energy for cup finals, don't they, usually?
Well, I think it can go either way. I mean, I think that's the interesting thing. Players react differently to the pressure, because I think there are some that end up getting a bit of stage fright and, overawed by the occasion if they've got a sort of a big crowd at Wembley, particularly if it's their first time playing at Wembley. There'll be others who'll sort of rise to the occasion and absolutely feed off the crowd. So, it's difficult to predict what impact it will have, but for sure it's such a shame for the players who haven't been to Wembley before that their first experience of it will be such a strange one.
Yeah. With Sunderland fans, we see kind of already the Wembley merchandise going around, and we've got a virtual ticket initiative trying to raise lots of sums for charity. But yeah, I mean, has it gripped the Tranmere fans as well, kind of in terms of a cup final, and if they're getting into all the merchandise going around and everyone getting, even though they're watching it at home?
Yes, yeah, it has. I mean, I wouldn't say it's quite the same as, when everybody's planning the journey down and sharing, this is where my seat is and where are you, what block are you in, and all the usual shenanigans. But yeah, there is a big sense of anticipation and positivity around it. We've had a beer produced specially that's going on sale shortly, so I'm sure that will go down well.
Fantastic. And I mean, you mentioned it earlier on that you have been lucky enough to get to games. I'm assuming that you're making the trip down to Wembley.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been going to all the home games. We stopped going to the away games when that was discouraged, when the third lockdown came, because there was this particularly virulent version of the virus going round. So we haven't been to the away games recently, but we have been to all the home games. And yeah, I definitely wouldn't miss Wembley.
Well, I mean, because it's a cup final, I'll not ask for a prediction because it is a cup final, and anything it's a toss of a coin in a cup final. But what I'll just say is, well, I hope you have a great day, and hope it's a great game, obviously. But other than the final, of course, I'm going to wish you all luck for the rest of the season. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you, Nicola, and thank you for the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And likewise to you guys. Yeah, hopefully, whatever happens, hopefully it's a good game of football, and hopefully we'll both be a division higher by the end of the season.
Yes, definitely. I think that would soften the blow for whoever the losing side's going to be at Wembley, but that would be fantastic. But thanks again, Nicola. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Thanks again for everyone listening. And as always, check out what's going on the site. I'm sure there's going to be another pod dropping very soon as well. But from us, it's bye for now.
Swerving the checker trade.